Right now, Kadyrov's lightning is dying. The family is already making preparations. The will has been written. Chechnya is in an uproar after these secret appointments. A terrible catastrophe in Russia. People are lining up in queues. This strike by the AFU put an end to it. There is no fuel and there won't be any. It's chaos there. An explosion on the oil pipeline has paralyzed the capital. Putin can no longer hide this. A NATO attack on Russia. Troops are already at the borders. A deadly threat to Putin. A sensation. Trump's breakthrough, a visit to China, and threats. This is the climax of the war. Either they reach an agreement now, or it's the end. The fate of the world will be decided. The US will stab Putin in the back. A complete nightmare. Putin's urgent decree has shocked all of Russia. No one expected this. All this and more in our next episode of Hotspot. Urgent. Kadyrov is preparing his family for the end. Something unexpected from Chechnya is happening right now. Is Dondon really dying? Observers have already counted about 80 family appointments to leadership positions. Why is Kadyrov in such a hurry and what is really happening to him? All the details of this madness, watch right now.
The system of power in Chechnya has long been built around the cult of the Kadyrov family. For Ramzan Kadyrov, this is both a strength and a weakness. Everything is personally subordinated to him. But new data shows that it's not just about controlling the region. Dondon is building a true dynasty, securing his influence in case of his death.
I appoint only those individuals whom I truly trust.
According to BBC estimates, more than 80 members of the Kadyrov clan already hold key positions in the government. 20 control the security forces, 11 sit in parliament, and the rest are ministers, businessmen, heads of foundations and sports clubs. This is not a coincidence. It is a carefully constructed system of hereditary power transfer.
The people have simply resigned themselves to this fate. They are not completely subdued, I know that. We have a very serious underground movement in Chechnya. But today, the situation in Chechnya can be seen as, well, a concentration camp where the entire population is held hostage. There are those who serve this regime, and we, on television and in propaganda, only see those who serve this system, these occupation structures. As for the general population who are waiting and biding their time, no one sees them or pays any attention to them. People are simply trying to survive and make it through in this situation.
Kadyrov has also strengthened the system through marriage alliances. His children have married into at least 15 influential Chechen clans: the Delimkanovs, the Geremayevs, the Vizmuradovs, and others. In this way, through weddings and business, he creates a shield for his family, turning Chechnya into his personal principality.
With these significant marriage ties and strategic alliances, Ramzan Kadyrov is actively trying to secure the personal and unwavering support of the most influential Chechen clans and their respective leaders. Just in case this informal and often unwritten contract with Vladimir Putin, the powerful Russian dictator, is ever unexpectedly terminated or dissolved. We know that for many years, Kadyrov had the right to basically do whatever he wanted and remain unpunished, and he actively took advantage of this. This applies to political assassinations, influence over federal politics, corruption, and even these harems that the project reported on. So if Putin does eventually abandon this logic of personal immunity for Kadyrov and his circle, then the Kadyrov family will have to rely on the loyalty of other Chechen clans that are close to Kadyrov's, but still exist separately from him.
The heirs have already been assigned their roles. The eldest, Akhmat, heads the sports and football club Akhmat. The second, Zelimkhan, runs the fighting club and the boxing federation. But according to experts, the main successor is the third son, Adam. His scandalous notoriety has only helped him. After beating a prisoner in the Grozny detention center, the teenager was not charged. Instead, he was rewarded. A few weeks later, he became the youngest head of the regional leaders' security service. At 17, Adam was already the secretary of the Chechen Security Council. His career path remarkably mirrors that of Ramzan himself. Everything is also mapped out for the women in the family. The eldest daughter, Aishat, went from fashion designer to deputy prime minister and now owns Chechen Mineral Waters, which brings in billions in revenue. Khadijat, Tabarik, and Khutmat, along with their husbands, have also been placed in key positions in government and business. But behind the facade of glamour and ostentatious luxury lies fear. Dondon's own health has raised concerns for several years now. Frequent medical leaves, rumors of a serious diagnosis, and absences from federal events. For the Kremlin, Kadyrov remains a guarantor of stability, but the question of his successor is still unresolved. The law does not allow his sons to take the position of head before the age of 30. This means that Moscow will have to find a compromise between the interests of the clan and the formal requirements of the law. And while the family prepares to inherit power after Ramzan's departure, behind the scenes Moscow may be preparing a completely different scenario.
Shock! NATO is preparing for an assault. Troops are already at Russia's doorstep. The alliance is conducting a large-scale war rehearsal in Finland, right at the Kremlin's gates. European and American soldiers are honing their skills ahead of the decisive battle. Putin is terrified. What specific combat scenarios are being practiced, and why are the exercises taking place so close to Russia's borders? Watch right now.
International military exercises Southern Griffin 25 have begun in Finland. 1,600 servicemen from Europe and the USA are taking part in the maneuvers. Since the beginning of August, Finland's Ministry of Defense has stated that US troops have been actively participating in exercises on Finnish territory and in the Baltic Sea since the second half of 2025, increasing their military presence there. Little-known Russian sources are reporting on the alliance forces' exercises right at Russia's border. Top Russian propagandists, as well as the official Kremlin, remain silent.
In recent years, Moscow has recorded unprecedented NATO activity near Russia's western borders. The alliance expanding its operations justifies this by the need to deter aggression. The Russian side has repeatedly expressed concern over the buildup of the bloc's military presence in Europe. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has emphasized its readiness for dialogue with NATO on an equal footing, provided that the West abandons the militarization of the continent.
The Southern Griffin 25 exercises involve NH-90 transport helicopters and MD-500 light helicopters belonging to the Uti Jaeger Regiment, as well as F-16 Hornet fighter jets in service with the Finnish Armed Forces. In addition, aircraft from the armed forces of various European countries and the United States will also participate in the maneuvers. After Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Finland, in order to ensure its own security, joined NATO almost immediately. Now, exercises are held here on a regular basis.
The Russian Federation periodically raises the issue of a possible armed confrontation scenario with NATO and the new countries that have joined the alliance. Specifically, this refers to Sweden and Finland. Let's at least recall those events when the so-called map of possible territorial claims by the Russian Federation against a number of Baltic countries appeared. Moreover, it was about possible Russian control over the Swedish island of Gotland.
These exercises are part of the implementation of the Agreement on Defense Cooperation between Helsinki and Washington, under which the American side will gain access to 15 Finnish military facilities. In a recent interview, Finnish President Alexander Stubb stated that the militarization and preparation of Finland for a possible invasion will continue as long as the war in Ukraine persists.
As I have always emphasized, we cannot do anything about our geography. We have a history with Russia, and we will have a future with Russia. But today, of course, relations are very complicated. In fact, they do not exist because of the war. But someday, when the war is over, new relations will certainly be built. Finland will establish relations with Russia only after the war with Ukraine ends. Putin has united Europe, expanded NATO by bringing in Finland and Sweden, and has effectively increased NATO's defense spending from 2 to 5%.
The Russian Federation has repeatedly voiced its territorial claims and its intention to protect Russian-speaking populations in the Baltic countries and beyond. That is why Finland and other countries bordering the Kremlin are acting proactively. For now, Russia's main military resources are concentrated on the war in Ukraine.
Various dates are being mentioned. These include, of course, 2026 and later dates as well. So accordingly, NATO countries, specifically the closest neighbors, the countries bordering the Russian Federation or those nearby, are trying to replenish their arsenals with the types of weapons that will allow them to actively counter possible Russian aggression.
Recently, the United States deployed 3 B-1B bombers to Norway for important NATO exercises to practice close coordination with allies, rigorously test combat readiness, and carry out a number of crucial joint missions. The Southern Griffin 25 exercises on the border with Russia will continue until September 12th.
It happened. Trump has declared war on Russia, an economic war, but it's not that simple. The White House has also decided to threaten Kyiv. With what exactly? Unbelievable. Trump's fateful visit to China. Here's the real reason he's going there. This meeting will change everything. All the details in the report.
US President Trump called Lavrov's statement about Zelensky's illegitimacy and Putin's refusal to meet with him nonsense and a show.
It doesn't matter what they say, they're just putting on a show. Everyone is just putting on a show.
We recognize him as the de facto head of the regime, and in that case, we are ready to meet with him. But when it comes to signing documents, we need a very clear understanding that the person signing them is legitimate. And according to the constitution of Ukraine, Zelensky is currently not legitimate. President Putin has made it clear that he is ready to meet with Zelensky if there is a real summit agenda for the meeting, and that agenda is not ready at all.
His statements are, to a large extent, just playing to the audience. This is an attempt to demonstrate his own political weight, which he is rapidly losing precisely because of such statements and his inability to resolve issues on the ground, so to speak. Yes, for the most part, completed military actions and effective economic solutions exist somewhere in the realm of Trump's imagination, but they are not often examples or concrete cases in real politics and economics.
Trump also promised an economic war against Russia if it avoids negotiations.
I want to stop this. It won't be a world war, but it will be an economic war. And the economic war will be tough, very tough for Russia. And I don't want that. But we need to look at the situation more broadly. After all, Zelensky is not entirely innocent either. It takes two to tango. I say this all the time. They need to be brought to the negotiating table. Right now, I have a normal relationship with Zelensky, but it's completely different from before because we no longer give money to Ukraine.
Obviously, Trump's position is changing very slowly, but it is changing with regard to Russia. But for now, it's rather difficult to say that there is any decisive point of view that could become a trigger for changing policy and truly increasing pressure from the US on Russia.
According to Trump's special envoy Witkoff, Putin is ready to sign a peace agreement.
Yes, absolutely, he wants peace. There is a peace proposal on the table. Putin really did say this, and we hope he will keep his promise.
Perhaps it's only a secret to Trump that Putin understands only the language of force. In order to achieve peace, it is necessary to create the kind of conditions that Putin will fear, where his army will fall apart. And then the Nobel Peace Prize so desired by Trump might actually end up in his hands.
Witkoff also announced a meeting with representatives of Ukraine this week.
I will meet with Ukrainians this week. The meeting will be in New York. This is a big signal, and we communicate with the Russians every day, and we might see a bilateral meeting.
Meetings between groups and representatives of the US and Ukraine in various formats are happening constantly. Not all of them have any political impact. Often these are technical negotiations, and especially, I think, in the context of selling American weapons at Europe's expense, using European money. Recently, Lindsey Graham publicly stated that supposedly the US is preparing to lift the ban on using American weapons for strikes deep inside Russia. This could potentially be a very significant major step forward in the overall comprehensive policy framework and its implementation.
President Zelensky also reported that this week there will be contacts with a number of countries that could serve as platforms for negotiations with the Russians.
This coming week, there will be important contacts with the nation of Turkey, with various Gulf countries, and with several European countries that could potentially serve as suitable venues for substantive talks with the Russians. On our part, everything will be as ready as possible to end the war. It is important that our partners confirm this, and going forward, everything will depend solely on the will of world leaders, primarily the United States of America, to put pressure on Russia.
It seems that everyone is preparing for negotiations except Putin. According to analysts, Putin will reject the proposal from the United States and Europe regarding security guarantees for Ukraine. All recent statements by Russian officials point to this.
It is absolutely clear to everyone that there are a number of principles that, according to Washington, must be accepted, including renouncing NATO membership and discussing territorial issues. And Zelensky said no to all of it. He also said no to repealing the legislation that bans the Russian language.
In order to end the war, and as we can see, for Trump, this is truly one of the highest priorities, the very approach needs to be changed. We need to stop trying to persuade Putin, stop looking for ways to approach him, and instead act decisively and with focus. And in this context, of course, the first thing is sanctions, and the second is supporting Ukraine in the military sphere.
We can only guess how much more time and how many more Ukrainians killed it will take for Trump to admit that Putin is not actually his friend, but a ruthless killer who manipulates everyone around him for his own interests.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now. Shock! Russia has collapsed. The gasoline crisis has reached everyone. In many regions of Russia, there is a real fuel hell. People are standing in insane lines at gas stations, and in the temporarily occupied Crimea, the situation has spiraled out of control. Now gasoline is only sold with ration cards. What does this mean for the Russian economy? Find out all the details right now.
Gasoline shortage in the country. Gas stations, Russia. The official explanation for the shortage is unscheduled maintenance at oil refineries. The real reason is being concealed by Russian propaganda.
A distinct line on Melniknaya Street, right there on the road. Oh.
The fuel shortage has been felt most acutely in Zabaikalsky Krai, Primorsky Krai, and the temporarily occupied Crimea.
As I clearly see it, there are two primary and significant reasons for this current and ongoing fuel shortage. The first, and perhaps most widely discussed, is what everyone is indeed talking about, that some Russian oil refineries have unfortunately been hit and impacted by recent events. And this, let's say, created a physical shortage of fuel, which leads to its scarcity.
Since the beginning of August, Ukrainian drones have attacked Russian oil refining infrastructure. In less than 3 weeks, at least 7 of the largest refineries have been affected, forcing them to completely halt production. The first to be hit were the Ryazan and Novokubishevsk oil refineries. Look, it's about to blow up. Did you get it on camera? Oh wow, unbelievable. 5 days later, the Afipsky refinery came under attack.
A drone suddenly hit the industrial plant.
On August 14th, one of the largest industry plants in Russia, the Volgograd refinery, shut down. The next day, UAVs struck the Syzran oil refinery.
Drones are flying. Drones over there.
There's absolutely no internet connection available. It's all completely burning down here. And on Samara News, we watch something or other, perhaps a local broadcast or a special report. Most recently, on the night of August 23rd, the Novoshakhtinsk refinery, a significant industrial facility, was reportedly hit by an attack.
I think there's another reason that no one is talking about publicly. But based on the experience of a similar situation in Russia that happened in September 2023, it's quite possible that this is the case. It's the cancellation of the damper. Back then, in 2023, the Russian authorities, aiming to optimize budget expenditures, decided to reduce payments under the damper scheme. The damper is a subsidy paid to fuel sellers for selling it domestically at relatively low prices.
Since the beginning of summer, wholesale prices for A95 gasoline on the Russian exchange have risen by 35%, and since the start of the year, by more than 50%. A92 has increased by 40%. Even at these high gasoline prices, there still isn't enough for everyone. People complain that fuel can only be bought with vouchers for enterprises and special equipment.
Russia is facing the task of cutting expenses as much as possible. The main reason for these expenses is waging a full-scale war against Ukraine. But Russia does not want to stop the war. That's why I think the decision was made to cut the damper payments. Moreover, a meeting on optimizing damper payments is scheduled for early September in Russia. But most likely they decided to cut these payments even before that meeting. And as shown in September 2023, when damper payments are cut, businesses involved in fuel sales simply hold back the fuel and don't allow it to be sold, since doing so would either result in a loss or the profit margin would not be as high as it could be.
Journalists report that the self-proclaimed head of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, admitted on a local TV channel that there are fuel problems on the peninsula and predicted that there will be a shortage of gasoline for another month. The sale of AI-92 gasoline has also been suspended for residents of the Kuril district, which is part of the Sakhalin region, because the entire supply there is needed for special vehicles. The situation with gasoline could be resolved by Putin's friend, the Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko. However, he is in no hurry to do so.
In 2019, Russia decided to implement a tax maneuver. What did it involve? It meant that instead of an export tax on oil, a tax on oil extraction was introduced. Why is this important in the context of Belarus? Because Russia and Belarus are a union state, and according to the agreement, the export tax on oil that Russia collected in relation to other countries, or rather in this context, in relation to Belarus, went into the budget of the Republic of Belarus. In other words, Belarus didn't pay anything. But the mineral extraction tax did not go into the revenue of the Republic of Belarus. This was done for one simple reason, because Russia understood that Belarus was making money by taking raw materials from it and producing petroleum products from that raw material, from oil. And for 5 years, starting in 2019 and finishing in 2024, they spent time trying to minimize as much as possible the amount of fuel produced by Belarus.
Essentially, Russia ended up suffering from exactly what it was fighting against. With his stubbornness, Putin continues to drive the country into a pit of shortages and high prices, and the victims of his actions are ordinary people.
It has become known Moscow is in collapse. An explosion on the oil pipeline. All of Russia is in an uproar. Sensational news. A complete disaster. Putin's summer offensive has failed spectacularly, a resounding fiasco for the Russian army. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has issued an ultimatum. Could it be that the fate of Donbass is already decided? Watch for all the details.
The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine confirms that Ukrainian troops are engaged in combat operations near the villages of Zaporizhzhia, Novorohorivka in the Dnipropetrovsk region. The Ukrainian command also draws attention to the fact that reports of these settlements allegedly being occupied by Russian forces do not correspond to reality.
It became quite obvious that this advance would happen after the Russian occupation forces moved beyond Zelenoy Pole and Novopol, which are in the Donetsk region, and reached Tomirivka. In other words, their further movement was supposed to continue accordingly along the rivers. Again, this is movement in the direction of the Volchya River and also towards the river, if we're talking about the Zaporizhzhia region, Yangul and Varna. So the main objective for these units right now is to advance along the courses of the Volchya and Vorona rivers directly to their junction and then continue moving forward. If we're talking about the Zaporizhzhia region, this is to encircle Huliaipol. And if we're talking about the Dnipropetrovsk region, it's movement towards Pokrovsk.
The Russians remotely scattered Lepestok-type anti-personnel mines on one of the streets in Kherson. The National Police note that this weapon is extremely dangerous for local residents, as it is very difficult to spot in the surrounding environment. And for the mine to detonate, it's enough to simply step on it or drive over it.
For them, this indiscriminate form of mining is directly related to terror against the civilian population. That is, just like the uncontrolled shelling of residential areas with artillery, the indiscriminate use of multiple rocket launch systems, and targeted drone strikes against civilians. All of this is an integral part of their terror against cities located in the front line or near rear zones.
National Guard fighters have shown how they destroy enemy artillery and ammunition depots in the Pokrovsk direction. Russian equipment has been disabled and the ammo dump put on quite a fire show, our defenders summarize. Russia's summer offensive in Ukraine has completely failed, reports Bild military observer Julian Rubka. Although the pace of the Russian troops' advance has been the highest since November of last year.
I can't say that Russia's offensive has been a complete failure, because during the summer offensive of 2025, in this phase, Russian forces captured more than 1,300 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. So it's hard to call this an absolute failure. But they really did not accomplish their main objectives that were set before them, namely capturing the city, encircling the city of Pokrovsk from 3 directions, encircling Kostiantynivka from 3 directions, encircling Siversk from 3 directions, as well as Kupiansk, Lyman, and Borova.
Russian failures are nothing new, especially when they plan to go up against new Ukrainian drones with sticks. In this video, a Russian assault soldier explains how the command ordered them to fend off a Ukrainian Baba Yaga drone with a stick so it wouldn't terrorize the infantry.
So, we've created a new killer, basically, for the Baba Yaga. And can't believe the command. It's shocking, really. They told us to hit it with a stick, hit the Baba Yaga with a stick so it wouldn't terrorize the infantry.
This is Andrei. He's already fought until he got wounded, but he doesn't plan to stop fighting. He says as soon as he's discharged, he'll head to Washington. For now, he's thanking the volunteers for their gifts.
Just got a little wounded, scratched up.
So nothing serious then?
Yeah, everything's fine now. Next week, probably, they'll discharge me and I'll be back in the fight, crawling all the way to Washington.
But our next doesn't have such a rosy impression of the war. Serviceman Sergei Pogadayev showed the path of an assault trooper from arriving at the front to ending up in a wheelchair. First, he says that there is no water at the positions, the soldiers drink urine, and there is no evacuation for the dead and wounded, and that all of Russia should know about this. And at the end, he picks out a new means of transportation for himself.
Nice. I used to always look at elegant Mercedes vehicles, and now I'm truly captivated by powerful machines like this one.
This is Alexander Chernyshev. He suffers from chronic hepatitis C and does not want to fight. Because of this, he and his comrades are being threatened with being zeroed out on Ukrainian territory.
They're trying to send me, someone with hepatitis, to a combat mission. I refuse and ask to be prosecuted, but instead they threaten to zero me out.
Along with Chernyshev, Alexei Chechnya and Yuri Kuznetsov are also being held in handcuffs at the deployment point. They are asking to be prosecuted for refusing to participate in combat and are appealing to the public for help so that their voices can be heard. In this video, a former Russian army serviceman calls on soldiers from Bashkiria to switch sides and fight for Ukraine.
I left the Russian army because of fratricide, hatred towards us, and lack of respect. And I joined the Bashkir company, where we are respected, valued, and treated well.
The Bashkirs, as they themselves say, are fighting against Russian Nazism and disrespect. They also help with the exchange of Bashkir prisoners and the search for their relatives.
Shocking. Putin has legalized torture. Russia has returned to the Soviet hell. While Belgium hopes to negotiate with the Kremlin, in Russia itself, words have turned into horrifying actions. Torturing detainees is now not a crime, but a fully legal method for law enforcement. All the details of this madness, watch right now.
Even fewer rights for the people? Why not? Russia has begun the process of withdrawing from the Convention Against Torture or Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment.
We really can do it.
Prime Minister Mishustin has already signed the decree and sent it directly to Putin. But why only now?
I think that's just how things turned out. They decided the time had come. In fact, everyone already knows and understands perfectly well that prisoners are tortured, detainees are tortured, everyone is tortured. Nevertheless, purely formally, this convention was signed and even ratified by the State Duma in Russia.
But here's what's interesting. According to the convention, the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture has the full right to come and inspect prisons, penal colonies, pre-trial detention centers, and so on. But it has been reported that Russia stopped responding to requests for cooperation a long time ago.
Well, look, there was a similar situation with the European Court of Human Rights, right? Everything happens gradually, step by step. So at first, Russia stopped complying with the decisions of the European Court and then eventually left the Council of Europe altogether, right? So it's the same thing here.
Nevertheless, about 3 years ago, Eva Merkacheva prepared an entire report on the topic of torture and even mentioned this convention. But of course, none of the changes she requested were implemented.
I ask you to support the initiative to introduce amendments to the criminal code to create a separate article on torture. Let me remind you that there is a UN Convention Against Torture which Russia has ratified, and in fact we were obliged to introduce such an article. But so far nothing has happened.
People tell Putin about torture right to his face, while he just lowers that very face, as if it doesn't concern him.
She is one of the last members of this presidential council who well spoke the truth to Putin's face. And of course he didn't like that. And naturally he didn't like the conversations about torture either.
But what at this point does a formal withdrawal from the treaty give the Kremlin when in reality it hasn't been working for a long time anyway?
It's exactly a clear demonstration that, my dear friends, you are indeed under our protective care. So please do not run off, as everything will certainly be fine. Just simply do as you are told. And in order to fully fulfill our specific wishes, you are then free to do absolutely whatever you desire. If you need to torture, torture. If you need to kill, kill.
And this is far from the first time Russia has withdrawn from international agreements. First, Moscow withdrew from the European Convention on Human Rights, and now it's the turn of the Convention Against Torture. So Russians are being deprived even of formal international protection.
Before there was at least you had to keep up appearances, right? Well, like you could beat someone, but carefully, so there wouldn't be any marks. Torture, but not to the point of, so to speak, damaging internal organs. Put someone on a bottle, but not too deep. Only now these restrictions are becoming fewer and fewer. So for ordinary Russians, things will only get worse.
Russia is moving further and further away from international rules of the game. It seems like the Kremlin is deliberately closing the doors so that no one interferes with building its own special reality.
I would indeed call it back to the Middle Ages, yes, truly meaning when the practice of torture is explicitly allowed, and then, as they often say, a vast and comprehensive arsenal of various tools and instruments appears that can be effectively used to carry out that very torture.
Despite everything, on August 26th, Eva Merkacheva even commented on the idea of Russia withdrawing from the convention and called it quite expected. At the same time, she noted that Russian laws prohibiting torture will not be repealed. But we understand, for the Kremlin, laws have long meant nothing, neither Russian nor international ones.
That's all. And for more breaking news from the front, tune in to the next episode.